Jon Sundell, thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us where you're located, tell us about your work, and please tell us a story. And I think you're also going to sing a song for us, is it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We are in your hands.
All right. Well, I'm over here in North Carolina in the southeast of the United States, the birthplace of country music. And actually, I'm going to start out with a song by Jimmy Rogers, who's often known as the father of country music. He was a brakeman on the railroad, and in the last 7 years, he began performing country music, and he became a great star. And he did all this as he was suffering from and dying from tuberculosis,
Hmm.
but wrote and sang some wonderful songs. And the song I'm going to sing is called "Mother, the Queen of My Heart." It's it may come across to you as a little bit camp, a little bit overly sentimental, but I invite you to to take it very seriously. And it's one part of two stories which are about young men who are on the wrong road in life, and their parents try and try to turn them toward the right road, and they just don't do it. And then after the parents' death, something unexpected happens, and it becomes a moment of change for them. And it's kind of along the idea that when we learn things, particularly if they involve transformation, it has to be at the right time. And often we just won't do it until maybe at the right moment we can. I remember way back in my college days when I used to smoke but never really wanted to continue. And I stopped on several occasions, but each time I stopped, it was like I somehow felt that I was at a stopping point, that I could do it, and that at other times I couldn't. And of course, when you hear of people whose lives are totally abandoned to drugs, to alcohol, to things like that, it needs to be at a particular time when they can make that choice. So that's kind of what this is all about. So this first one is "Mother, the Queen of My Heart" by Jimmy Rogers. I had a home out in Texas, out where the bluebonnets bloom. I had the sweetest old mother, how happy we were, just we two. One day the angels called her, that's a debt that we all have to pay. She called me close to her bedside, and these few words she did say: "Son, don't go drinking and gambling. Promise you'll always go straight." 10 years have passed since that parting. My promise I broke, I must stay. I started gambling for pastime. Last I was just like them all. I bet my never dreaming that I'd ever fall. Adi-o-de-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay. One night I bet all my money, nothing remained to be seen. All that I needed to break them was one card, and that was the queen. The cards, they were dealt round the table. Each man drew a card on the draw. I drew the card that would beat them. I turned it, and here's what I saw. I saw my mother's picture, and somehow it seemed to say, son, you have broken your promise. So I tossed the cards away. My winnings I gave to a newsboy. I knew I was wrong from the start, and I'll never forget that promise to Mother, the queen of my heart. Adi-o-de-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay.
Fantastic.
Mother, the queen of my heart.
So he got the
Well,
card he wanted, right? He got the queen.
he got the queen of his heart. He sure did.
But it looked like his mother, and he felt guilty about the whole thing.
Uh-huh. That's it.
Fantastic.
Well, I've been both singing and telling stories for about 50 years now. And I love mixing the two. And I'm constantly thinking, as I discover a story, discover a song, of a perfect match for that. Love to put them together. I feel like it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, the juxtaposition. And I do a lot of material in Spanish because I've worked with the Hispanic community here in town and in Central America for many years. My wife is from Colombia. And I found a story in this one of many books I've got of Hispanic folklore, Mexican folk tales. And I've got my screen reversed. That's right, I do that for my own sake. And so that's the story I'm going to tell you. And it goes like this. There was a rich man who was raising his only son by himself. His wife had died shortly after the boy was born, and so he raised the boy himself. He was a good man, and he loved his son dearly, but he never managed to grow close to him. He could never really get close. Well, time passed quickly, and the boy became a man. And the father realized quickly that his son was on a wrong path in life. He tried many times to redirect him. He'd say, Carlos, tú estás gastando tu vida. You're wasting your life. You're wasting your life, Carlos. I've worked long and hard to build this wonderful ranch. Now that you're a man, it's yours to help me run. You own this ranch as well, Carlos, but you spend all your time drinking and gambling at all the cantinas in town with this group of ne'er-do-wells. They're leeches, Carlos. They don't really care about you. But Everything he said to his son, it fell on deaf ears. He continued as always. As Carlos grew a little older and his father grew older, his father's health began to fade, and he was worried about Carlos's future. He tried a few more times. He said, "Carlos, when I'm gone, your money will dwindle and you'll soon be left with nothing. You'll have nothing, Carlos, and you will find that these friends of yours, these so-called friends of yours, they'll abandon you. They'll leave you alone. And you will be penniless and alone in this world. I beg you, change your path now before it's too late." Fell on deaf ears. Time went on, and the old man was on his deathbed, and he sent his servant into town to find Carlos and to bring him back so he could say his last goodbyes. He was so drunk in a cantina he could barely walk home. And when he entered the room, the father asked the priest and the servants who were gathered round, excuse me just a second. The father asked the priest and the servants to leave the room while he talked to his son. He said, "Carlos, I won't try to change your ways. I've already tried to do that too many times and failed. But I ask you for one promise. One promise. Carlos, when you find yourself penniless and alone, and your life has become miserable, if you no longer feel the desire to live, I ask that you come back here, take this rope, go to the main room, throw that rope over the beam in the main room, and don't drag it out. Hang yourself and be done with it." It was a strange request, but Carlos agreed. The old man gave him his blessing, and he died. Well, Carlos was a bit thoughtful after that, for a few days anyway, but then he went back to his life of carousing. The old man had left him everything he had. He had left his entire estate. He left the ranch. He left his money. He left everything. And it seemed like Carlos and his friends were in a race to spend it all and to drive him to ruin. Before long, the ranch was deteriorating. The workers began to leave because Carlos wasn't paying them on time and they needed to feed their families. Things went down and down. Carlos sold all the cattle. He sold the horses. He sold whatever he could as his money was diminishing. And finally, he was down to one last family of servants that stayed out of loyalty to his father. Well, about that time, the village was preparing for its Saints' Day, the day in which they honored and celebrated their patron saint. It was the biggest day in the village. It was the biggest day of the year, and everybody was excited, waiting for that day to come around. When the day came, Carlos went to the bank to take out some money, and he received a rude surprise. "Señor, no hay nada. Su cuenta está vacía. There's nothing, sir. Your account is empty." Well, Carlos was shocked. He knew that his money was low, but he thought he could still earn it back with his gambling. But there was nothing. There's nothing in the account, he asked. Ni un peso, senor, not even a peso. Carlos was in shock. He wandered away from the bank toward the celebration. There he was met by his companions who said, Carlos, Carlos, estábamos esperándote. We were waiting for you. Vamos a celebrar. Let's celebrate. But when they found out that Carlos had no more money, each one began to make excuses and drift off. And Carlos was standing there alone. He was surrounded all around him by happy people, smiling and laughing with their friends and their family and their loved ones. Everyone was celebrating, having a good time. And Carlos was all by himself. He was wandering around in a daze when he ran into the servant, the son of the last family of servants. And he said, Carlos, ¿qué pasa? Why are you so sad? Carlos wept as he told him the sad story of his ruin, of his descent into ruin, and his friends who had all abandoned him. The young man invited him to have a drink. He treated him all that afternoon to drinks and to food. They went on and on through the afternoon. They got quite drunk. And finally, as the evening came on, Carlos thanked him for his kindness and began to wander home in a stupor. And he thought about what had happened. He said to himself, I have spent all of the fortune that my father spent his life building for me. I have spent it all on hypocrites, on false friends. It's just like he said. Here I am at the end of his story, alone, penniless, and life like this isn't worth living. And he thought of his father's last request. And when he got home, he found the rope. He took that rope and he hung the noose over the beam, and he took the other end and he tied it securely to a steel rail. And there was a stool there conveniently nearby. He put that stool underneath the noose, and he stood up on the stool. He said a prayer asking for forgiveness for his wasted life. And he put the noose around his neck, and he kicked the stool away. His body went down, and he felt the noose tighten around his neck. And then suddenly he heard a crack, and the beam gave way, and Carlos tumbled to the floor. And he looked up, dazed, at the broken beam, and above it, he saw a crack appear in the ceiling. And through that crack, which opened, there came a trickle of gold. And that trickle turned into a torrent. And the torrent came down and half buried the bewildered young man who lay on the floor. He was staring up in a daze at that crack, trying to understand what had happened. He pinched himself to see if he was alive and awake. And he was. And he stared until it finally came to him what had happened. His father, his last request was a trick. It was a compassionate trick to offer his wayward son one last opportunity to turn around his life. Carlos didn't sleep that night, but he thought long and hard. He thought about the past which he had wasted, and he thought about the future, undeserved and unexpected, which had been offered to him. And in the morning, he called the servants together. He thanked them all for their faithful years of service to his father, and he apologized profusely for his irresponsibility. He offered them all a hearty raise, and to the young man who had been so kind the day before, he asked him if he would be his partner in running the ranch. Well, the young man, of course, agreed. He invited back the other workers who had left with good reason, invited them back at good pay. Carlos was a changed man from that time on. He gave up his rowdy ways, and he became the hardest working person in that village. His so-called friends, when they heard that he had regained his wealth, they all came running back. But instead of the warm welcome they expected, Carlos told them in no uncertain terms did he ever want to see their faces again. And if he did, they would receive the other end of his bullwhip. Well, the ranch blossomed once again, and Carlos, for the first time in his life, he felt at peace and satisfied. For the rest of his days, he felt a debt of gratitude to his father for his love, his generosity, and his wisdom.
Okay.
So that's the story.
Fantastic. John, you're such a good communicator.
Well, thank you.
Yes, every word
Thank you.
crystal clear. I was so hoping that Carlos would somehow escape his fate, and
He did.
I couldn't see how it was going to happen, but at the last minute it happened.
He did indeed. It's a satisfying ending, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I see that I'm past my 20 minutes. Don't know
Yes.
if you all have any thoughts or questions or comments, or are you ready to move on to your next?
Yeah, we do need to move on, but
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for getting up early in the morning, and
Oh, you're welcome. And I didn't realize it would go quite that long. I
that's
thought it
fine. That's fine.
would. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so
Well,
much.
have a great rest of the festival. I hope to join you again later.
Thank you
I
very
think
much.
I'm going to go have some breakfast right now.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.